welcome everyone, and welcome to another round of Tech Talks, where we're kind of exploring some of the topics that are highly focused on some of the less explored verticals, such as regenerative finance, blockchain localism, DeFi, and many others that are attempting to make real world impacts by reshaping our communities and our institutions. And so today we are going to be talking about regenerative assets with Zero's Joshua from Azos Finance, new decentralized protocol on Ethereum where you can borrow against your crypto assets. So just welcome, Josh. It's great to see you and hear from you again. I haven't seen you since basically the book club. That was my first introduction into the blockchain community as the kind of the first foray. And that's
I don't think I knew that was your first.
It was, yeah. I didn't know anybody in blockchain anywhere, and that was kind of the first thing I ever did. We covered the Federalist Papers, which was really awesome. But
I haven't seen Aaron in a minute, but yeah, that group with Aaron and Naran was fantastic. That's a perfect segue into my intro, because Naran was the first person to hire me in the space when I made the jump from Lyft to Consensus. He hired me to work on Panvala, which went through a few iterations before it ended up at the thing that it was when it shuttered.
Yeah. And so, yeah, for those of you that don't know Josh, I kind of want to give you this moment to kind of introduce yourself and ask you one of my favorite questions, which is, how did you get into the blockchain space in the first place? Like what path wove you here? And just kind of give a brief introduction on who you are and what projects you're involved in too.
Yeah. Is this audio only, or is it video too?
It's video as well, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'm from Chicago. I had a career in politics before getting into tech. Burned out of politics, and I moved to China to focus on the other side of my degree. I was there for 2 years and then got accepted to a coding boot camp in Tel Aviv. Was there for 6 months, moved back to the US. Got hired by the Department of Homeland Security to do, I used to make the joke that to build the Muslim tracker, because this is the beginning of the Trump administration. But it was actually the exact opposite of that. It was a project to make USCIS, which is how people get green cards and then how permanent residents become citizens, which my now wife had to actually go through at the time. As a junior Java developer, and then because it was pro-immigrant and pro helping the environment, because the old process was sending in tons of forms and sending it back and using a lot of mail, and that contract got canceled. But I'd already moved to DC. I ended up working at Lyft. I was at Lyft for 3 years on the team that was responsible for beating Uber to IPO. We get to the IPO, and our department head said, yeah, your department's not allowed to exist anymore after the IPO, so you can find another job at the company, or you can fuck off. And then this is where the story gets interesting. So in 2018, I had started getting into Ethereum and tokens, and I didn't participate in any ICOs because I was told that Americans weren't allowed to. And so I followed those rules and didn't. So I didn't get to experience the crazy ups and downs that a lot of people from that era did. But I met this guy, Tommy, out of Austin, who, shout out to Tommy, he's now building a taco truck company, and he's planning an ICO for that. But he was trying to build decentralized rideshare with Chaser, which was a successor to Swarm City and Arcade City, which were parody era attempts at decentralized rideshare that bricked $18 million worth of ETH when that hack happened. And so I met Tommy, and I was starting to get disillusioned with Lyft, because they're planning this IPO, and I had met tens of thousands of drivers. None of the drivers got very few of the drivers got a handful of shares for doing 10,000 rides, but almost none of the drivers and none of the passengers got any equity in this IPO. All the bankers, the investment bankers, dumped. They got it all the way up to $76 and dumped all the way down to $8. And I was like, this like Ethereum was created to prevent literally this. And all the people who create the value of the network should own the network and should be able to benefit from the network and make decisions for the network rather than 25 cents. And now it's closer to 50 cents out of every dollar being vacuumed out of these local communities and sucked back to San Francisco, where they just make VCs and executives even more wealthy. And so I met Tommy and was like, you don't understand rideshare, but this token thing I don't really get. And so we started working on this white paper together. And it ended up being a white paper on why rideshare doesn't work. But through that process, I met this amazing person, Jacob Cantelli, who was working for Neuron on Panvala at the time. And through this connection with Tommy, basically we sent him this white paper and he's like, Josh, you clearly understand rideshare, but you don't really know anything about tokens or crypto or any of this. So you should take this class. And it was Blockchain Essentials in Consensus Academy, which I don't even know if still exists anymore. It was like a $69 class that you could take, and I took it. And then when this whole like Lyft transition was happening, we started talking. I revised the white paper. I graduated from the thing, and he's like, I've recommended hundreds of people to take this class, and no one has actually done it. Don't take that other job at Lyft. You should come work with me at Consensus. And so that was the very long, well, I guess not that bad, like 5-minute onboarding to Web3 crypto.
Yeah, and you've been involved in a number of projects since then as well, haven't you? Like, I think we had I can't remember the name of it now. It's kind of the HR one for operations for DAOs.
Opolis. Yeah. So I was at Consensus for 6 months, and then they tried to raise money from JP Morgan, and JP Morgan said you have to fire 20% of your head count, otherwise this deal doesn't make sense. Speculating on the exact words, they didn't say that exactly, but 20% of the company gets let go, as Consensus had done multiple times before. And I was like, I kind of want to get back into bikes and scooters. And anybody who's ever seen me at Denver knows that I love bikes and scooters because I take the scooters in ECC too. I ride them all around Paris. I'm a big shill for Lime scooters. And everyone's like, no, you got to go to Denver, find a job. You already have a ticket. It's in like 2 weeks. And I got my Cobra packet, which is for the non-Americans. It's this system where the government will maintain your existing healthcare plan, but you have to pay for it. There's no subsidy. So I went from paying $500 a month in health insurance premiums, not even carriage premiums, to $2,400. And yeah, and so I walked around Denver going, has anyone solved Web3 healthcare? I'm broke, and my bill just 5x'd. So, yeah. And everyone's like, you got to go talk to John Paller over at Opolis. And I met the guys at the booth and signed up to do some like free BD work because they didn't have any money and there was no token yet. And I was like, yeah, I'll work for a theoretical future token that you definitely aren't legally allowed to promise yet. And they ended up getting PPP funds and were able to hire me. And then I ended up a co-founder of the Opolis Employment Commons. Was there, I think my 5 years was like 2 months ago.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, it's been doing great work. And now you've come up to what we're going to be talking about today, which is Azos Finance, which is really awesome. And so this is largely centered around this kind of idea of these regenerative assets backing crypto collateral loans for a stable coin. And so maybe you can give the audience a little bit of like kind of background to Azos Finance and like what was the motivation for actually starting this project, and what was wrong with the, current systems that you saw that, weren't serving these types of, assets that are actually doing some good in the world?
Yeah. So I was not the idea person behind this. So I'm going to answer for other people, but I've been here long enough to definitely be able to answer it. So there was a bunch of the team used to be, because a bunch of your audience is going to be familiar with Raid Guild. A lot of Raid Guild folks. There's some DAO issues that we don't have to get into with Raid Guild that make it so that it's like, it's great, but it's it's kind of stuck. And so we were like, this is a great model. Let's try to improve it. Silver Door is founded. It's a Colorado cooperative. I'm a shill for Colorado co-ops. Raid Guild like kind of has a disregarded LLC of sorts, and it's mostly on chain. And we're like, oh, we should try to solve the legal, issue of this. So we created a Colorado co-op for Silver Door. Silver Door has like a bunch of clients. One of the ideas that came up was it was like an LST, and I was doing BD at Mantle at the time, and they were trying to get a grant. It didn't work because Mantle was refusing to give grants to anybody who was domiciled in the US. So that idea kind of fell apart. And then comes along this guy, T-Rex, who I'm sure most of you are familiar with. TR was helping to put on the hack refi at COP28 in Dubai, and had met Kyle, one of the original co-founders of Azos, who's no longer with the project, on an ETH Denver panel for the work that we had done on Rainbow Rolls, which was an NFT project we did back in 2021. We raised about, I think, like 100 ETH, $435,000. We gave away 80% of the proceeds to the Gitcoin Giveth and a bunch of things. So he gets onto this panel with TR. They meet. So TR comes back to us, Silver Door, and says, I want you to build this like stablecoin protocol that's backed by trees. This was like the hardwood stablecoin he had. And we're like, you're really close to a good idea, but this kind of incentivizes people to go like burn down a forest so that they can, like brick the system and take a bunch of value out. Let's try to use like debt. And so we built a CDP platform for the hack refi in November 2023. The team wins. And then we kind of were like, we should build out this product. I joined a few months later after ETH Denver 2024. That's when we had our first the evolution of the testnet. Did some more research. Should it be an L2? PGN was kind of going through. It's like, this isn't working. And so we're like, all right, let's just focus on a CDP platform. The core premise of Azos is Ethereum allows us to program our values into money. And so what we did was we took our values of wanting to make the world a better place, fixing the very obvious climate crisis, or at least getting people to pay attention to it through DeFi mechanics that are not like, please give me a handout, a grant, give me money, donate to this thing. And it's more like, let's use DeFi mechanics and pump metals to get people excited about assets that they can use composably in other DeFi protocols, get some yield onto it, and then get people excited around and create this flywheel for climate assets. So we started building out a risk assessment framework and an impact assessment framework to make sure we weren't listing like dead, like things that would like brick a CDP platform. And we came up with 4 categories. Carbon credits is a start, green bonds, RECs or renewable energy certificates, and PPAs. The PPAs, the purchase power agreements, are mostly like solar panels. They pay somewhere between like 8 and 15%. Green bonds pay a yield of like 3, 4, 5%, but they're not as, they're much bigger. They're harder to fractionalize. We're still in the process of finding tokenization partners for that. Carbon credits, which a lot of the environmentalists and traditional finance people are like, aren't these kind of fake and greenwashing? And there's tons of problems with them. And like as an asset class, categorically, it does have problems. But then you've got the EBF, the ecological benefits framework, and they came up with 6 words. Carbon's just one. Air, water, biodiversity, equity, and soil. That's another 5 areas to focus on. So there's a bunch of organizations that are trying to figure out what is the next type of carbon, or what is the next like credit. This is just an incentive. We should incentivize people to, clean water and clean air, and those should be monetized the same way like just putting solar panels on your roof is incentivized. And the one that I'm most excited about is RECs. So renewable energy certificates, which are very similar to and the same mechanism that municipalities use for bonds. So municipal bonds are often in the form of RECs. And so what we can do is like small town cleanups and clean energy incentives usually come from these bonds. And so we're in the process of starting trying to form a pilot with the city of Baltimore, using some elected officials that I'm friendly with, to try to pump money into the local Baltimore economy for renewable energy things, and try to get people excited about municipal bonds, which could not be further from a thing that is usually exciting.
Yeah. I mean, do you see these kind of impact assets like becoming more like having them proliferate more within kind of common traditional institutions like local governments and things of that nature that can be utilized for this type of activity or decentralized?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, so when you have for Azos Finance in particular, is the idea is to have as many different kind of impact assets backing this kind of stable coin that you have, and if so, what qualifies an impact asset for Azos, and how do you go through that process of determining, hey, this is of quality, this is worthy of actually utilizing as a form of collateral?
Yeah, this is definitely a TR question, but I'll give it my best shot. The I kind of I have a much broader view. I think there's like this just I don't want to use the word disagreement, but there's a difference of opinion on the team over where that line should be drawn, like what counts as an impact asset. I would like to more broadly include public goods, because I think there's a lot of categories beyond just climate action specifically, that are beneficial to people. We haven't figured out exactly where that line is. Like questions like Cello came up as a potential asset, and they do a lot of good. How is that good quantified? Is enough of the good that they do percentage-wise environmental in nature? And so these are questions that we're, as a community, going to grapple with when we, the initial team, kind of hand off governance to the protocol and the holders of the Azos governance token. We're starting with 3 assets. We're starting with Klima, the Glow Dollar, and Helios's HLSP, which I don't know if, I think a bunch of you guys are probably familiar with. We can dive into any of those. I know that like the history of Klima's treasury is not pristine, but the market has shaken out the value of the carbon credits that they have underlying. They have a great 2.0 that's on the way that has better methodologies. A lot of the problems that happened with the Klima ecosystem early on were, well, aside from Olympus forks are not good, particularly for retail who don't really understand how DeFi mechanics work. And so like Klima's backed by carbon credits in the treasury, it pumps to $250 million market cap. There's only like $10 million worth of carbon credits on chain. And it's like, wait, hold on. Why is this worth $250 million? Because you idiots are chasing Olympus style yield. And so that came back to gravity, but a lot of gravity brought it back down to earth. But a lot of the problems with that system were caused by the Web 2 infrastructure and the bridges that have this like grasp over how things should be done. And the biggest irony to them not liking that Web3 databases make them obsolete is that in the 60s, the Web2 databases did the same, well, in terms of timeline, they did the same thing to the Web1 versions of these same databases. They basically, they vampired it and turned it into their Excel spreadsheets. And this is what Web3 is doing to the Web2 versions.
Yeah, and you mentioned that, you mentioned values, because I do think like when it comes to the type of impact assets that you utilize within the Azos Finance as collateral, what type of values are you shooting for kind of like this initial implementation of Azos, and do you see those sets of values kind of evolving as time moves forward, and what types of assets you include within it and things of that nature?
Yeah, I like to I personally like to stay in the public goods realm. I know Penguin, who just joined us, my co-founder, is also has a strong history of being very public goods oriented. Um, there's a possibility that the Azos protocol gets like friendly forked and what we're calling Azos as a service, where if there is too much disparity between narratives and then there's a need for a split, we've kind of designed the system to be able to accommodate that.
Nice.
The most wild example that has kind of come up is like real estate, and real estate or debt on real estate alone probably doesn't fill a public good or a um, environmental narrative. But like, what if it's a carbon neutral building that is designed mixed use and has a dedicated set of low income housing and is in an part of a neighborhood that is specifically designed to be walkable and is part of another set of like a whole neighborhood that's just no cars. Like, does that very specific thing fit into our framework? I would argue yes. I think some other people would argue no. And I don't know. I think it's way too early to kind of figure out where that fork in the road years from now ends up, because there's so many environmental assets and public goods that touch environmental or climate action now that we have as a TAM. It's like $1 trillion. We don't really have to worry about that yet. Like Glow Dollar is a great example where it's like it's got this public goods narrative. It's a nonprofit that gives away all of its profits. They have a robust climate category. I don't know what percentage of it goes. I think John can probably answer that. What percentage of Glow's public goods stuff goes back into? It's based on voting by holders. Yes, awesome. What goes to climate specifically? I don't think it all has to go to climate specifically because it still fits a public goods narrative.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And so, do you see that as kind of this like fork approach of kind of diversifying those values if they spread out too much as a means of scale for Azos, or is it like?
So the thing I want to caution there, and like this is one of the reasons that Azos kind of exists and the mission that we build is like the refi ecosystem struggles with reaching escape velocity. I think because a lot of us are lefties and a lot of us kind of get into these like purity test things. Yeah. We're like, well, this isn't exactly what I would like. And we do have a culture of if you don't like it, fork it. And I think the more you fragment liquidity, the harder it is to grow. Because if you notice, all of the things that are in the top 100 by market cap are things that like had very centralized strategies to like concentrate liquidity, and they market made that success. And so there's a cross between like, do we want to play the stupid VC games to get there, knowing that all of the assets we bring along with us are going to be wildly successful because we had to play those stupid games? Or do we get bogged in to like, this asset fits like 80% of the requirements, is the threshold 85? And so if we list it, is some of the community going to try to fork it? And it's like, we really shouldn't be getting into those kinds of conversations when there's we need to see the forest through the trees.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And so
sorry. The thing that I would want to say on like what I imagine the forks will end up being is like, BlackRock is tokenizing trillions of dollars of commodities. I think it's supposed to be like $170 trillion by 2030 of the global market cap of commodities. My personal narrative for Ethereum is that all of it will be on chain, and eventually within the decade, we will be in it's like the Pixar didn't happen for millennials 10 years ago. Like now it'll be on chain or it doesn't exist. Yeah. And a significant number of those assets are going to be climate forward or public goods forward. Yeah. Or we as Azos, as a massive protocol that should have political power, can drive some of these commodities toward being carbon neutral or, locally sourcing things and cleaning the air, water, all the different things that we care about. As a, I don't know, global economies are expensive in terms of like fossil fuel output, and it would be great if we could eliminate those.
Yeah, and in terms of, so for those of the audience that aren't aware of what impact assets are, what are stable coins, what are collateralized debt positions, maybe you could walk us through kind of the Azos experience for the user, like in terms of just kind of this kind of traditional loaning out your collateral, getting a stable coin, utilizing it, burning it back to receive your collateral interest and all that. Maybe you could walk them through that just to make sure we cover everybody and make sure that anybody who is interested in this gets a full picture of what this actual protocol seeks to accomplish.
Yeah, so for a typical like DeFi user, and then there's what a like more like risk off or hands off, like more traditional asset manager would look like. Just to set the ground, it's a MakerDAO style CDP platform. It's actually a fork of High, which is a fork of Reflexer, which was a fork of MakerDAO. So we're in the same family of CDPs. Our first deployment will be on Base because that's where the majority of our initial sets of collateral are based. Ha, that wasn't even an intended pun. Let's say you hold USD Glow. What you would do is, let's say you've got 1,000 USD Glow. You'd be able to you need a code to get in, a referral code. You type in the code, the password. You now are able to create a proxy. You basically unlock the system. It's signing a transaction. Then you are able to open a safe. So then you deposit your USD Glow. There's a threshold at which you're allowed to borrow to make it so that you don't borrow beyond your capacity. I don't have the exact numbers offhand. Maybe Penguin will put it in the chat. So you got 1,000, maybe you borrow like $800 or $900 worth of AZUSD. Now your Glow is locked in the Azos protocol, and you have a liquid derivative or AZUSD that you can then put into a liquidity pool. You can spend, you can send to somebody because you lost a bet and you owe them some money. Whatever you want to do with it. It's your AZUSD to do with whatever you please. When it is time, stablecoins can borrow up to 11%, which is about 90 for every $100. All right, so you'd be able to borrow about 900. You don't want to let that position get too close to liquidation, because what'll happen is if your collateral is worth less than 111% of what you borrowed, you could be liquidated. And that's where the system basically takes your collateral, pays off your debt, and then you're kind of left with an empty safe. This is to make sure that the liquidation ratio is 107%. So we make sure that there's enough of a buffer so that you don't open a position that's immediately able to be liquidated. With Klima, which is the only volatile asset that we're listing at Genesis, it is likely that it is possible that if you mint the max amount, if there is some sort of like 10%, 20% move in the market, you could be liquidated. So you do want to be cognizant of that when you're opening positions. When you're ready to pay off your debt, if you're not holding AZUSD, you'd have to go buy it from the market, probably an aerodrome pool, or get it from a friend. Then you come back to the Azos website. You go through the process of I mean, it's burning it, but you're paying off your debt, which will have accrued 5%, which is the stability fee, to be able to unlock your collateral. The cool thing when we get into talking about carbon credits, none of which we're listing at Genesis, but are working on acquiring and finding tokenization partners for and being able to pass our risk assessment framework. None have passed the risk framework yet. We're working on making it so that you should be able to, because carbon credits are meant to be redeemed. Buying a carbon credit doesn't really do anything for the environment. It's the redemption process that is, the retirement. So when you retire a carbon credit, that's when you're kind of cashing in on the PR value of why you purchased that carbon credit in the first place. Of being able to retire them from inside of our vaults, which would be kind of cool. Also being cognizant of, if you retire them, they're no longer valid collateral. And so you're lowering the amount of collateral that you've got, and you could end up liquidating yourself. Obviously, our front end will issue some warnings saying, please don't liquidate yourself via this transaction. Or maybe it'll prevent it. I don't know. Doesn't exist yet, so time will tell.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of kind of these impact assets, compared to kind of the traditional assets that back other CDP protocols, is there a different challenge that you have to look for in terms of, things like volatility, things like risk, and what are some of the things that you think, are going to be kind of core, principles to keep that overall CDP over collateralized to the point where the system remains healthy and continues to run as it moves forward?
Sure. I'm not particularly worried about volatility. Liquidations are how the protocol generates revenue.
Yep.
And that revenue can go back into what we'd like to do with it is to generate additional assets. So for example, you've got USD Glow and you've got HLSP, the Helios token. Like if our protocol starts earning revenue, what we can do is we could buy more HLSP that earns 8% and continue stacking it. Same thing with USD Glow, although that's not revenue, that's incentives. I think the issue, not the issue, but the thing that we have to be very careful of is the tokenization partners are the risk vector that is beyond our control. So we have to make sure that we're listing assets that are with trustworthy custodians. Because essentially when you bring something on chain, like Wrap Bitcoin's a great example. Or CBBTC, which is Coinbase's Bitcoin. They're the custodian for that Bitcoin, and then they're issuing a debt token, CBBTC, that then has to be redeemed via Coinbase to unlock the Bitcoin. During DeFi summer, there were a bunch of, this is 2020, 21, there were a bunch that you could interact with Badger, and some of them ended up basically dying because the people stopped trusting the custodian at this bridge. And tokenization partners are similar. But I think that as BlackRock starts to dump trillions of dollars into these custodians and RWA frameworks, that will end up with like very similar to like FDIC insured versions of these bridges. And so I think that's the future that we're looking at, is just making sure that all of the assets that we're listing have collateral. And so that if there is a problem with a bridge and the token ends up being worth nothing, even if the underlying asset is still there, that the protocol doesn't end up with bad debt because insurance is able to pay it off.
Yeah, and do you think that this type of platform can actually help improve, I guess, the holdings of these impact assets?
Yeah,
I feel like some
absolutely.
people are kind of scared to get into impact assets or to hold on to them. They have the values for it, but they kind of sit idly there and they're not sure, what the risk profile is. But
Sure.
putting them to use, I think, I don't know.
Systems that are based on grants, and like I have immense love for Gitcoin and Giveth. This is not a negativity thing. But systems that are based off of grants are generally, or emissions are down and to the right, especially if you don't come up with enough incentives games or alignment around making people want to play the game, want to play in governance, want to like have utility for doing the thing. And one of the reasons that we designed this platform was to help assets that are distressed or just stressed or rely on grants or use tokenomics that are not necessarily they don't have their own like pump mentals built in, to give them another vector of utility. So you're holding one of the questions, and this comes up with Glow Dollar, is like, you want to hold it. What do you do with it once you hold it, right? And Azos helps answer that question. You deposit it into Azos, and now you're able to benefit the system. You can compound it, so you could sell that as USD for more USD Glow, which helps increase their market cap, so they can generate more revenue that they can put back into public goods via voting. It's still $1, so that doesn't necessarily fill the other half of your question. Klima is a great example where they've got a mission to try to onboard a bunch more carbon credits, biodiversity credits, and fund projects and forwards. So basically make it so that a project that has not generated a carbon credit yet, but could or will, so they basically loan them that money. They issue them a grant. Depends on whatever the circumstances. It's happening in Klima, and so this is sell pressure in the Klima token. We're going to try to reverse that gravity by having people deposit their Klima into Azos with mint AZUSD, and hopefully give out the AZUSD as grants. This should eliminate sell pressure, and using the DeFi yield should increase the buy pressure. And so now the system has much more float, because I haven't looked. I think Klima now at like 14 cents. But if you eliminate the sell pressure, put a little bit of buy pressure, and let's say it goes to 20 cents, just as an example, or 28, it doubles. Now the system has double the float to be able to continue to fund more grants. That's double the amount of grants you can issue for the same amount of underlying token.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really awesome. And once a user has this kind of the AZUSD, do you foresee this kind of being integrated into other DeFi protocols and being able to use as collateral for other areas of decentralized finance? Or is it something that you think that'll be just kind of used in
I imagine that there's a future in which like AZUSD ends up as collateral in something else, because deep down, we in DeFi are all degenerates who have to stack derivatives on derivatives. I think the better answer is like we're talking to Curve about deeper stability coin pools. We've got a centralized exchange strategy to list them, so that to help with the sell pressure, so that people who need to sell the AZUSD can without worrying about steep slippage. We're talking to EtherFi about being added to their stable pool. So there's Pendle. There's so many different areas throughout DeFi that we can become part of. It's all just what capacity do I and whoever comes on to join us doing BD efforts can get it made as ubiquitous as possible. The more people use the system, the higher the TVL, the higher the yield, the stronger argument we have to make these arguments with people who frankly do not give a flying fuck about preserving the earth. But like, that's okay. We don't need them to. They're going to see the yield and be like, oh, this is a game I want to play, because it's about yield. And rather than having people gamble with like dog tokens, maybe they start gambling with like carbon credits, which would be great.
Yeah. Put that speculative game around impact assets, which would be the ultimate goal, in my opinion. It amazes me that people haven't, explored that area as much. But
they have. I think the problem is whenever, and I'm not going to speak for everyone, but when I hear refi, I immediately think I'm not going to make money from this.
Yeah.
Like, and I do it, and I'll buy the thing, and I'll donate to the thing because I love public goods, and the people who are doing it, and I want to support. But like,
You're not
I'm
getting
like,
that.
I'm throwing good money after that. I'm never going to make money from this.
Yeah.
And like that's okay. But that's why we didn't brand ourselves as refi. Like it's a DeFi protocol because I don't want to. I want the ape brain to trigger. I want people to be like, there's yield. I'm going to make money from this. It's not like some, you know, sit at the burner camp and like hope that the earth gets better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
no, refi definitely has that obstacle to overcome because the current refi approach towards thing is set in this kind of idealism that is, not really, pragmatic when it comes to generating funds or generating, a big following or people in the current space to actually engage with them in a meaningful way. They might come and say, oh, that looks really nice, but I'm not going to put any meaningful money towards it. And so, yeah, I do think it's a huge problem that refi has to overcome in a lot of ways. And maybe the refi brand has been, damaged to the point where you're losing on that kind of speculative financial flows. But
yeah,
it's
I've never liked anybody who comes from any sector of anywhere that is not climate sees refi and says, oh, that's a refinance. That means refinance to 99.9% of the world. We already lost that meme. And it's like there was an effort to make it like regenfi a while ago. And I like regenfi better than refi, but like it's DeFi. It's just DeFi. And the only reason to say it's not DeFi is because not you, but like you don't feel comfortable with the idea of speculation. You don't want to be associated with speculative games. And like that's fine, but the system's not going to work if you don't have people speculating.
Yeah. And it's really hard to get that group of altruists to actually, break out of their shell a little bit and say, okay, this is okay to have this type of speculation and this type of behavior as long as the outcomes are associated with these end goals and these values that we set. And so I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if, Azos, how do you look at gamification then? Do you see that as something that you could incorporate at some point, or is it something that this kind of area in blockchain needs?
Like, so I have a 2,700 something day streak on Duolingo.
I saw that. Like amazing, by the way. Congratulations.
Thank you. It is it's been fun. This is very funny. I have to set my clock back on my phone to another time zone so that I can not lose my streak this evening because I didn't do it before. Maybe I did this morning. Anyway, I'm completely familiar with the concept of like needing to get people to like want to keep a streak going, or we have a leaderboard, we have achievements. We're talking to Brian of PistachioFi, which is a just quick shout out for Pistachio. And full disclosure, I invested in Pistachio, but it's an app an iPhone app that you can use that's like one-click DeFi things, and we're working on a strategy with them where you can just wind up a position, and like apps like that are the ones that are at the level where it's like earn your daily streak by paying down $1 of debt per day or whatever it ends up being. Gamification is part of everything that we do. I'll never forget this conversation I had with, I'm not going to say who it was, an executive of TikTok who came to ETH Denver 2022. And I was walking them around and we were talking about, I was trying to get them to tokenize. And they're like, we could never, because the regulations are already such that there are certain limitations that TikTok even has based off of how addicted people are. So they have to follow stricter regulations, if you can believe it or not, than casinos based off of how addictive it is in certain countries. And so like to not be banned in countries that have those restrictions, they like are not. And so if they added any sort of monetization or tokenization component, it would just be completely illegal. I was like, oh, wow, I didn't thought about that way. But yeah, that's a burden that you bear for, capturing 20% of the Earth's attention all the time.
Yeah, it's terrifying. And so with when it comes to, you know, Azos and its role in this kind of space, do you see this as kind of being something that impact assets can kind of plug into, like it's something that they can incorporate? Like, should if you have an impact asset right now, should the goal be to get on as a collateral asset onto Azos? Like,
Yeah,
is that the kind of
absolutely.
goal for
We're looking at okay, so we basically, if you meet the impact assessment framework, which if you're a refi protocol is going to be a much easier threshold than a risk assessment framework. The risk assessment framework's not there to say you're not eligible for Azos. It's there to say your liquidity is not deep enough to support a debt ceiling of $1 million. So let's start you smaller. And so we've designed it, and the shout out to Penguin for the brilliance here. We've designed the system to scale with the protocols. So as your protocol goes from being 20,000, 50,000 market cap to the $1 million market cap, we're able to scale with you. And as your liquidity pool deepens and as more liquidity gets locked up, we're able to unlock more of that. And a great way to think about Azos is a permissionless line of credit. It is over collateralized, so you're taking out a line of credit against your own assets. But like, if you don't have a track record, and by track record I don't mean like a history of being good in public goods, but a token that has a solid track record. You can't just like go and say, hey, let's take out $1 million. We have to scale it. And that's to make it safe for everybody, so that all of the other projects feel safe using it. Because if we open up an attack vector like that, that's too easy to exploit, then it could tank the entire system. And then, well, you're fucking the entire refi ecosystem. We don't want that.
And I assume
we're
there's
also
liquidity threshold or something, that minimum amounts of liquidity on secondary markets or anything like that they must pass for that?
No, it depends.
Okay.
Because like if you've got really low liquidity and low volume, we can just set your debt ceiling at relatively low, right? Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And how do you see governance playing out in Azos? Like, is going to be an Azos governance token, or is there going to be, you know?
Yeah, there will be. We're going to play the points game for the summer. When we go live, there are a bunch of points that have already been earned by participating in our incentivized testnet. Until the protocol goes live, which soon, TM, we actually created a code for TEC. So if anybody who's listening wants to join and give credit to TEC, it's TEC-2025. So if you want to go play with the testnet, TEC, I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, go play with it for real. It was a really smooth experience so far. Like I've been playing around with it. I love it because it's one of those things where I've seen some testnets where, especially with CDPs, that are very clunky, and the vaults are hard to access and get into. But you give a full suite of testnet tokens of all of them. You can claim them daily, making sure that you can. Yeah,
our tech team is fantastic. Penguin leads a great team. Like Sulky has poured his heart and soul into this front end and making that experience smooth. Super grateful to him. And then we've got G, who's a G.
The idea of having this kind of I guess the leaderboard type of thing, but also being able to test out all the different functionalities within the platform to earn a certain amount of points, and having that type of approach towards educating the user prior to the launch of the platform. And so I don't know, like I haven't seen many projects that have done that really well, but it seems like you guys have set that up really nicely. And so maybe you can talk about that a little bit. But
we wanted people to try to break it so we could figure out like what the vectors of attack were. And so we figured out like, what do we want to incentivize? We worked backward from how does Azos make money? We wanted to incentivize testnet users to go do those things. Taking out enormous amounts of debt, getting liquidated, paying it back. Like these are all different edge cases that we wanted to play with. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
Your question was about governance. So we have a bunch of partners that we've signed. We're trying to figure out allocations. We want to make it so that the community of community, like we're a community of communities, and that the participating assets are able to, well, they'll earn from opening up the initial positions. But we want to make sure that this, like, the token is able to get into the hands of people who care about it, and who care about like building the future and helping to onboard tokens that are not going to break the system, and the good stewards of refi, but also who are not afraid to make deals with governments. One of our biggest partners is the Brazilian Carbon Credit Co-op, who's helping us deep in Brazil. We've got some arms tentacles into like Ireland and Thailand, and so there has to be, like, we're like bridging this gap between the degenerate DeFi world, the hippie refi world, and the suit institutional world, all to try to save the planet. And so, yeah, we want to, reward people who play with the system. Penguin and Gnome have their hands full, and Selkie trying to figure out the bots that have been using the testnet and make sure that they don't get over incentivized. We want real people to get the tokens, and organizations that are going to be helpful to us.
Yeah, governance, the distribution for governance is a very difficult thing, and I've seen a lot of different approaches towards it, but I don't think anybody's perfectly yet. But
yeah, I agree. It was really interesting at MCon this last year. Craig from Eigenlayer pitched like I think an early version of what their governance may end up looking like. I don't know if it's out. I haven't paid attention in the last few months. But I'm sitting here and I turned to Spencer Graham from Hats, and I was like, did he just like reinvent the US Congress and subcommittees, but like better and on chain? And it's like, yeah, maybe. I personally like the optimism approach of doing like the House of Lords, House of Commons. I think Opolis and Sporked Out also do this pretty well. The Colorado co-ops that have a board of stewards. The board of stewards is responsible. The token holders elect the stewards, and the stewards are the ones who have the legal liability. We haven't figured out exactly what the governance is going to look like. We've got a few months after we launch to figure out and what the token's going to do. I'm like firmly with Vitalik that pure token voting is not a good idea.
Yep.
So coming up with some sort of like hybrid infrastructure is, I think it's important.
Yeah.
We can't fuck that up.
And do you see like the token serving as kind of like managing some of the kind of more functional aspects of the platform, whether it's like whether to keep or remove collateral assets, adding things of that nature, or is it something more of off-chain type of soft governance that you see the token being utilized for?
I don't know yet. I definitely lean toward on-chain and less of the. I've spent the last like 6-7 years criticizing off-chain governance and Snapshot and a multi-sig being fake. So we're definitely not going to do that. We're working on a Hats integration to make sure that like we can empower stewards. Maybe it's through a liquid democracy. Maybe it's through like stewards who get elected. I do like the bicameral system where you have some things that are, and I think Eigen's doing this too, where you do have a popular vote of token holders, and then there's specific committees that are there as a veto of popular capture. So if there's some sort of like populism where if somebody just starts buying up enough tokens to be able to control things, that they're not able to brick a system or put in bad collateral. Checks and balances. I think a system of checks and balances is important. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. It'll definitely be on chain.
Nice, yeah. And So I want to ask you a couple more questions before we, kind of wrap up this talk. But you mentioned earlier that you kind of had these different sections of refi, the kind of institutional, the crypto native, and these kind of local and small organizations. How do you approach those entities when it comes to Azos Finance, and like which of those groups of people have been the most challenging to engage with, and do you think all of them will eventually kind of onboard into this idea of what Azos offers?
I guess mostly Telegram, sometimes email. I know that wasn't how you meant the question, but I thought it was a funny way to answer it. Who's been the most difficult? I don't even know if I could say who the most difficult is. I know the governments don't want to necessarily work with an organization that's like, well, because we're going to be a DAO. We don't have our offshore foundation. We're trying to figure out in April, I was at the White House with an Ethereum delegation advocating for being able to deploy things from the United States without having to worry about the SEC coming and kick your shit in. And them saying to us, well, the Trump administration's IRS is not, and IRS and SEC are not going to enforce this, is not particularly reassuring if they're not going to advocate for it passing in Congress, because the next administration will enforce it. And so I right now I serve as the CTO of the Arizona Crypto Blockchain Commission, which we did not name it AZUSD because of Arizona, which there's an irony in there. But we created a sandbox in Arizona where theoretically we could deploy this from Arizona, and as long as we keep the raise or something under $5 million or 10, I don't remember what the specific number is, we're technically shielded from the SEC. That's there's so many different variables inside of the US and regulation that's we don't know exactly what to do. Do we do the MIDAO thing that everyone else does? And there's a bunch of risk vectors there.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question.
It's terrifying because you're just asking people to take on unknown risk, and it's just you can't expect a lot of people to do that, and that's really frustrating. But yeah, so let's take just a quick last question. I just want to say, I like to ask what kind of the long-term vision is. So, if you look at Azos Finance and you project it, 10 years from now, what does the world look like in the most successful, ideal version of that protocol? And what does the interoperability look like? How are people using it?
A global conquest for sure. I think a world in which basically every tokenized commodity touches some part of the Azos protocol. I think you've got, we've talked about Azos as a service, by which you've got these other entities that are deploying different kinds of tokenized RWAs and DePIN assets via friendly forks that kick back some of their value to Azos. We want to take, in the nearer long term, we want to take that revenue and put it into deepening liquidity, but also supporting our target assets that are yield bearing, so that the protocol can continue to earn revenue, helping put more solar panels out there. We've talked about using it to, one of the governments in Brazil pitched us on using it to buy up land for conservation, generating even more credits and building out reserves and ecotourism things, all of which would be revenue generating to help save the rainforest. I think there's so many different things we could do on so many different scales that if revenue is generating into the system, I think the people here and the people listening and the Azos holders will be able to say what do we want to prioritize? How much money do we want to put into cleaning rivers and oceans, and do we want it to be air or biodiversity or soil? What is the thing we want to focus on? I think buying up a ton of land for conservation is a really cool idea. I've always wanted to do that. Shout out to Colorado, which was a semi-failed experiment that never off the ground. I can issue my own AZUSD like dollar using my coconuts as collateral. Uh, yeah. Well, you wouldn't issue your own AZUSD. You could take the tokens from your system, and we could run it through our framework. We could list them as collateral, whether it's like debt for the coconuts. I don't really know how the system exactly works. We should definitely talk about that. And yeah, you could mint AZUSD against the tokens in your system to be able to create float and eliminate sell pressure on your tokens.
Yeah, and I think that kind of brings up another question, like in terms of anybody who has or is facilitating the creation of impact assets, and they have the desire to participate in this kind of Azos ecosystem. What is your advice to them, and how should they approach Azos? What are the things that they need to make sure that they have in line and organized before they do so?
I'll start. Yeah, the first step is always a conversation. Like, send me a message. We'll figure out like what it all looks like. We're in the trenches doing the BD work. I'll say the minimum, we need like Oracle support. And so if it's not a stable coin, we have to figure out how to get Oracle support, or trying to get a price feed for your asset. So trying to, and each of the Oracle's providers have their own like minimum thresholds. So if you have a personal relationship with an Oracle provider that's willing to like provide that price feed, even that you don't have the liquidity and volume yet, that would be a good step, because then you could then argue that you'll be able to use the Azos protocol to help kind of drive more value into your ecosystem that will then fulfill their minimum qualifications. So you could kind of use that as a I don't know what the analogy is there. My brain just totally, not dog and pony or apple and orange. It's one of those other things. As like I say, like, extend me some credit reputationally here, and we will fulfill your minimum requirements. We know once the system gets oiled.
Yeah.
We're right now on base. So in the near term, if you're trying to use Azos within like 3 to 6 months, having an asset on base that has Oracle support would be ideal. We're talking to a number of other L2s about expansion. Who gets expanded to first is going to come down to who pays us to go there, as much as that sucks to be the incentive. My devs are not free. In fact, they are drastically underpaid, and I'd like to get them fair wages. So you get outsized equity only lasts so long. We have like rent to pay. So like cough up L2, let's go.
Yeah. They got their sequencers. They can afford it.
Yeah, so, right?
Yeah.
They print their own money.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I guess the last question I have for you is for anybody who is kind of new, or just, kind of first getting introduced to the idea of, impact assets and decentralized finance. What is kind of the one thing that you hope they take away from this conversation about Azos and how to interact with this industry?
I guess the joke answer would be that a speculative flywheel is coming to an impact asset near you. So buckle up. Yeah. This side of the ecosystem is so great, and there's already like, it's unfortunate. It's fortunate and unfortunate. Like, because of the lack of deep liquidity in our sector of the industry, we are not often targets for scams. Like we do get, I mean, the scams are still there. Like, I get interview requests from North Korea constantly. But like you have more time to like figure out the basics without losing all of your money. Still, blockchain fundamentals are the most important thing. Like, not your keys, not your coins. Don't ever share your seed phrase. For the love of God, like, do not put your seed phrase anywhere on your desktop. It should not be digital. And then like when you share your screen or you screw up sharing your screen or control of your screen, like they can't steal anything from you because you don't have your keys on your desktop. Um, hang in there would be, yeah, OPSEC's number one for sure. Like hang in there. Bear markets are for building. That's a good one. Come to Eat Denver. It's free. That's the best place to meet people. Oh, here's if you have not met someone in person or you were not introduced by someone that you met in person, you just don't respond. That is not a person. It's probably a bot or it's a scammer. Like if you really feel bad, and I do sometimes, I'll message them and be like, if you could find an introduction through a mutual friend, like I would love to talk to you about whatever the scam messages that you sent me. Almost none of them ever come back. That's a good way to prevent getting scammed. But I know on like in this side of the ecosystem, we want to be much more like we believe that everyone's here for the right reasons and are good, and for the most part, I think that's true. But there's always going to be a few bad apples that you got to be careful of.
Yeah, I do too. I think it's really hard to keep everybody safe, but keeping introducing people that you know of and connecting each other.
One of the things that I've always struggled with this industry is we have like messaging that's like WAGMI, and it's like we're all designing systems that are trying to like the rising tide that lifts all boats. But then we treat it all like personal, individualized finance, and nobody really gets taught on good key management and good like it's like, oh, if you have a big up or a big down, like like you lose a bunch of money, it's like, oh man, you should have been more responsible. It's like, but we preach that we're all here, we're all a community together. Stuff like that shouldn't happen. And I don't know if Azos solves that particularly. But we're here to help lift as many boats as we can. So all of the impact assets that people are trying to in the disjointed areas of the ecosystem, one of the missions here is about coconuts, and another is about river cleaning, and John's really into solar panels, and like we want to raise all of these things up together, and I think we can do that. And we just there's that XKCD panel that was like there's 15 standards and we created this one to unify them, and then the joke is like now we have 16 standards. We would very much like for Azos not to become the 16th standard, but to use Azos and the AZUSD to create a reserve currency for the entire regen ecosystem so that we all have this medium of exchange that unifies us, even though our individual missions are slightly different.
Yeah, I like that. I like that to end on too, because I really do appreciate you coming on, Josh, and sharing the Azos Finance vision. And so if anybody's interested, where can they learn more about it? And if they want to test it out, they can use the TEC code. Is that right?
Yeah. So TEC-2025, and that you'll go to app.azos.finance. If you need any testnet ETH, feel free to like if you and you are not able to figure out the faucet, ping me, and I'll send you some testnet ETH. Make sure you also send your ETH address. A few people ping me and we're like, we need some testnet ETH. I'm like, what's your ETH address? And I don't know where to send it. On twitter.com/Azos Finance. You can check out our docs at docs.azos.finance. I'm not allowed to solicit for fundraising in a public forum, but we are doing our pre-seed. That is a thing that is happening.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Conversations have been going pretty well. We're excited. Where else can highly recommend the docs? Yeah, the docs are great. Penguin did a fantastic job. I'm gonna butcher his Twitter off the top of my head, but something with computers. I'm 0x Joshua SL because 0x Joshua was already taken, and that guy doesn't even use it. So Penguin is twitter.com/C0MPUT3RXZ. Thank you, Penguin. Yeah, we've got a Discord that you can jump into. You can find it through Twitter. Thank you so much for having me. This was a great tech talk.
No, thank you. I'm really excited about Azos and seeing what develops, and if there's anything that we can do here at the Token Engineering Commons to help or promote, push, just let us know. Love the support everything you guys are doing.
Appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I really do appreciate you guys joining, and yeah, we'll have some more episodes and talks later on as well. So I look forward to having you back on at some point too, Josh.
Of course. Let's go Cubbies.
All right. Later, man. Bye, y'all.